Hey, Texas Study students. This is Coach Science, welcoming you back to another one of our video lessons. Today's video lesson is chapter 13.3 and slavery in Texas. Now, by the year 1860, the slave population was growing faster than the free population in the state of Texas. Now, slaves in the state of Texas had no legal right. They could not own property, they couldn't vote, they couldn't be married, and they had no hope of gaining their freedom in the future. They were basically seen as a piece of property. Now, as slave owners believed that they had the right to own these people and their property, right? They couldn't gain their freedom. What these owners would do is they would brand their slaves, as you can see in this picture of this slave driver branding his slave, right? Now you're probably asking, well, what does a branding mean? Now if we look at this picture right here, we see these cowboys branding their cattle. As you can see here, marking their property. This is exactly what slave owners would do. Here's another picture of it. We can see here, so I'm going to bring it bigger, of how the brand would look like after a finished and healed look. This is exactly how slave owners would mark their property of their slaves. This is exactly how some of the slave owners in Texas and the southern United States were able to differentiate between whose slave belonged to who. Now, the cotton industry played a huge part in this population of the slaves, right? Now, the growth of the cotton industry in Texas meant that more slaves were needed to work in the field. Now, as you can see here, here's a picture of some African American slaves working a very, very huge plantation farm area of picking up cotton, as you can see here, right? And they're working long and hard, and there you see drinking some water, taking a little break between their work. Now, by the year 1860, 1/3 of Texas population were slaves. That is a huge number, and this is how we can see how the cotton industry and the amount of slaves, how this brought in a lot of money to the people of Texas, and how the slaves played a huge, huge part in this cotton industry. Well, you're probably thinking now, well, Coach, how did so many slaves get here? Now, last time in the previous chapter, we talked about the Fugitive Slave Act and the Compromise of 1850. But with that comes this slave trade, right? The slave trade was the business of buying and selling slaves for profit. Now, last time we talked about the auction, right? Auction right there. Now, the auction was buying and selling and trading of property. Now, if you remember, these slaves were property of the white man. As you can see here, this person right here, before he buys or trades a slave, he's inspecting to make sure the slave is big, strong, healthy, and will be able to work hard for him. So, here we see that right there. Now, Galveston and Houston were large centers of slave trade activity. Now, there was 2,000 African American slaves who arrived in Texas between 1835 and 1865. Now, the next thing that we're going to take a look at is called the triangular trade. This was the process on how which slaves would end up in the United States as property of their owners. Now, make sure that you draw in the arrows and write down exactly the things that were traded between each continent to receive and to exchange in this triangular trade. Now, a lot of people actually believed that the United States would send ships to Africa, and just pick up slaves and then come right back. But that's not exactly how this triangular trade worked. It actually started with stronger African tribes capturing weaker, smaller tribes from the inner countries of Africa and bringing them to the coast to trade them off to other European and places like that. But you're probably asking, why would people of their own nation do such a thing? Now, one of the main reasons why the Africans did this was because the North Americans and the Europeans had goods and supplies that the Africans could not get on their own. Now, some of the supplies that they had were guns, cloth, iron, and beer, as well as rum, iron, gunpowder, cloth, and tools. Now, with these supplies being sent to Africa from Europe and from the United States, it was here that they would trade their fellow Africans to the United States, to North America, and to Europe for these things, right? Now, on this long journey home, as you can see here, on this long journey home, right, that they did, or excuse me, not home, sorry about that, on this long journey towards their new passageway that way, this was called the Middle Passage, as you can see there. So make sure you write that down underneath in your paper. This was known as the Middle Passage. Now, once on the Middle Passage, they would reach the Caribbean islands. Once they reached the Caribbean islands, the people of North America would trade such goods as fish, livestock, flour, and lumber to the people of the Caribbeans. And in return, the people of the Caribbeans would give them slaves, they would give them sugar, and they would give them molasses, some things that the people of North America could not grow on their own. Now, once these slaves would reach North America, as you can see here, they would be sold in auctions, and they would be put to work right away. Now, in return for these slaves, the United States would send to England whale oil, lumber, furs, rice, silk, indigo, tobacco, sugar, molasses, and wood. Now, another thing that was major that was also sent that's not written there, and you're going to want to write it in, is the Cotton King itself. Cotton. All right. Now, this vicious cycle continued in its triangular motion for many, many, many years to come. Now, how was Texans and slavery involved in this? Now, most Anglo-Texans did not actually own slaves, but still supported slavery because of this. And you're probably asking yourself, okay, if they didn't own many slaves, and they didn't have a lot of slaves, then why is it that they supported slavery? Now, they claimed that slavery was needed to support the economy of the South. So, in other words, what they're saying is, yeah, we don't own slaves, but you know what? We support slavery because it drives everything else in the South, the southern states. So, what does it come down to? Basically, it's coming down to we support slavery because it's going to bring us money, and this money allows us to live the comfortable lifestyle that we want to live for now. So this is why Texans supported slavery in the South, even though if they didn't own very many. They didn't really care about the African American or how they were treating other human beings. All they saw as slaves as property, and a slave was able to work and bring them money to be able to live their comfortable lifestyle. Now, all this slavery going down south in the southern states, you're probably asking yourself, what about the northern part of the United States, Coach? What's going on up there? And that's what we're going to talk about next, the economy of the North. In the northern states of the United States, the economy was based on industry and manufacturing and had never become dependent on slavery. Now, here in this map, we can see the division of free states and slave states. The slave states were the southern states right here in the blue. These states right here depended heavily on farming and planting and growing crop and cotton. Now the free states is everything you see in green. California, including here, and all this Maine, Vermont, New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin and Iowa. These states right here were the free states. Now you also have to remember that in the northern states, in these places right here, in California, slavery is illegal. The African American is free to work and get paid for it. Now, as I read earlier, the northern states were mainly for industry and manufacturing. As you can see here, a lot of the northerners working in a factory up north. Now, it's not so much that the northerners believed that slavery was morally wrong or enslaving Africans was wrong. It's just the fact that they didn't need to enslave people to work because they were dependent on industry and manufacturing, right? Now, the people of the South depended mostly on farming, right? So write that in, farming. That is why they needed slavery and they depended on it, comparing to the North, which did not need it. Now, another reason why the North did not depend on farming quite like the South was, it was two parts. One, it was way too cold for them to be able to do such farming as that. And the northern states, as you can see up here, the soil for them and the dirt was way too rocky for them to be able to plant and to be able to farm as compared to the southern states where these terrains and soils were much more fertile for the cotton industry, for the farming, and for the crops. So that's another one of the reasons why the economy of the North did not depend so much on slavery. Now you're probably asking yourself, where is the famous Sam Houston in all of this? Now, Sam Houston had resigned means to quit, from the U.S. Senate and ran for governor of Texas in 1857. Now, Houston strongly believed that southern states should not secede, right? That means to withdraw formally from the United States. Now, at this time, there was a great movement, not only from Texas. Texas wanted to leave the United States because of the slavery acts that were going on. They were starting to think about removing slavery and abolishing slavery in total. So Texas gets wind of this, and they want to leave the United States. And with them doing that, this fuels other southern states to also want to secede from the United States and withdraw formally to form their own country and come together to where they can have slavery. Now, Sam Houston ended up losing the election of 1857. But don't worry, guys. He didn't quit. He didn't give up. He ran again in 1859 and won. However, many Texans still preferred to secede or to withdraw formally from the United States instead of losing their state's rights and slavery. So what they wanted to do was remove themselves from the United States, from the Union, to break off and to be able to continue to have slavery. Now at this time, the United States is trying to abolish slavery. So that is why Texas and many of the southern states are thinking of seceding from the United States. This deep division of the states' rights and slavery will eventually lead the nation into what is the American Civil War that we will be talking about in the next coming days and weeks. The battle between the Union, the North, and the Confederate South. This concludes our video lesson on chapter 13.3 and slavery in Texas. Make sure that you like my YouTube channel and subscribe. Coach Signs all together. Now, this is Coach Signs signing out.